Hello everyone, what's up and welcome back to the garden. Today we are going to take a look around at what's going on this winter. Now I know it's been a very long time since I've done one of these kind of garden update videos. It was pretty warm in December, weather was pretty nice, and then once January rolled around it just got cold. And we've had a lot of snow this year, comparatively speaking. Usually we don't get too much snow, and we've even had some ice. We had an ice storm last week, and admittedly the decision to make these low tunnels instead of the big hoop house tunnel has kind of been worrying me with all this snow. Of course it was easier to manage the snow load to knock it off the little tunnels, but it seemed like to me the big tunnel always did a better job at retaining heat. In addition to a lot of snow and ice, as you can see here in this video, it's also been pretty cold, and I know that's like totally a subjective term, but we've had several nights with temperatures about 4 degrees Fahrenheit as the low. That's pretty cold for where I am, and several nights in the teens, and I mean for about 2 or 3 weeks the temperature didn't even go above about 30. So it's been pretty cold here, especially for someone who is trying to overwinter things like the ranunculus and the anemones and snapdragons and things here in these little low tunnels. It's been pretty cold for overwintering. So I thought we finally had a nice sunny day here. It was like 45, the sun was shining, it felt great outside, so I figured I would go ahead, go out into the yard and start uncovering some of these tunnels and take a peek in here. It's been weeks since I've been able to look into the tunnels to see what's going on in here. So it really was kind of a surprise, to me as much as it is to you guys. Since the weather was pretty nice, I also wanted to plant some freesia. These freesia came late, very late in December, and by the time they came, the weather was already cold and rainy, and I just didn't have a chance to plant them. So I also got these into the ground since it was such a nice day. But looking into the tunnels, getting right on into this, here are the ranunculus tunnels. Now, ranunculus, these were planted the first week of October, transplanted around the first week of October, which explains why they are so large. And actually, the fact that these were so much larger turned out to be kind of a detriment to their growth during the period of cold. It seems like the smaller plants do better when it's cold. You can see I have a lot of damage from the cold. They're kind of, leaned over and wilted looking, and some of them have that wet appearance when you get cold damage. Whenever your ranunculus are looking kind of rough, it's always to determine, is this cold damage? Is this some kind of mold or, some other kind of damage? This is definitely cold damage. Since the tunnel had been covered for so long, a lot of that taller growth had gotten leggy, and it wasn't as strong and vigorous as it should have been. So that was kind of an issue. Also, the things that are outside of a tunnel are not growing that well. I planted a lot of sweet peas just to let them overwinter without a tunnel, which I've had success with in the past, and those are very much struggling. Also have this tray of peony seeds and daffodils. Those are actually doing really well. I'll show you those at a later date, growing from seed. This is the other tunnel that has ranunculus and anemones in it. You can see these ranunculus are much smaller, and they're actually faring much better in the cold. We did an experiment with ranunculus outside of the hoop house. They look terrible, but I don't think they're dead. Some of these cold tolerant plants can look really bad and still come back and produce new growth in the spring. So I actually have not lost hope on those yet. So keeping on hoping. These are the scented stalks that were outside the tunnel. They're pretty much dead. These stems have started to dry back. These are pretty much a lost cause. I think it's safe to say that I cannot grow scented stalks without some kind of protection here in my yard. This was just a little experiment that I did with some seed that I had, and lesson learned, I guess. Here are the Sweet William dianthus. They look a little bit rough, but they are a very hardy biennial. They looked like this last year. I was kind of worried about them last year, if you might remember, but they came back. They grew great. The blooms were beautiful. I am not worried about these at all. When you're growing these cold hardy flowers, looks can be deceiving sometimes. Here is a closer look at the anemones. A lot of these anemones look great. They don't seem to be phased at all. Here a little bit later in the video, you'll even see that a lot of these anemones are starting to produce flower blooms. Even though we're here in the first week of February, we're already getting flowers. There's snow on the ground. I don't know what they're thinking. Usually about the first week of March is when I start getting anemone blooms, but these are very early this year for some reason. Not quite sure why. Not going to complain. It's just something interesting to take note of. I can always depend on the anemones to kind of show up and start giving me that very, very early season color, which is great because especially, you know, in the depths of winter and it's cold and dreary, it's nice to be able to kind of peek into a hoop house and see something that's growing and wants to, you know, it wants to thrive even though the weather is cold and conditions aren't exactly ideal. I actually have a lot of different varieties of anemones this year. I think I got a lot of the pastel ones and some of the deeper burgundy ones too. I can't really remember off the top of my head. A lot of our daffodils and our bulbs have started to push up through the soil, which I think is always a very welcome sign that spring is eventually going to be on the way. Here is the scented stalk that was in the tunnel. They look terrible also. However, they don't look as bad as the other ones outside the tunnel. I think these may still be alive. I know the foliage looks terrible, but the stems, when I fill the stems, the stems are still green and the stems are still pliable. If I've learned anything over this long 10-year process of learning to grow flowers, is that you don't give up on something just because it looks like a hot mess. I know that sounds kind of like counterintuitive, but I think it'll be very interesting to see what these scented stalks end up looking like in the spring, because even though they look like a disaster right now, I'm not totally convinced that they are a loss yet. Snapdragons look pretty good. We have some weeds popping up around the snapdragons just because the snapdragons are a little smaller than some of the other things, but they're faring well in the tunnel and they're faring very well with the cold weather. I'm really excited to see those. I believe this is the Potomac mix is what I planted, and maybe some chantillies. I can't really remember off the top of my head. I don't think I planted any Madame Butterfly this year. Anyway, hopefully we'll have a beautiful mix of snapdragons when those finally do bloom. Here's another look at the ranunculus. You can see lots of just kind of scraggly looking foliage. Again, I think it's better to have a small specimen going into the cold weather period than a large maturing specimen. These will probably bloom much earlier than the other ones, but again, at what cost? So it really is kind of like a balance in finding what works best for you and where you are in terms of timing and weather conditions. I also had a couple of these looked like they had been eaten, like maybe a rabbit had gotten in there, which is something totally new for me. I've never had any issues with rabbits or anything in the ranunculus damaging those, so that was kind of odd, I thought. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much what's going on here in the garden. Here is one of those anemones that I was talking about, actually in bloom, making anemone blooms. And this was like February 2nd I picked this flower. I can't believe that. It's absolutely crazy. That's really about it for this video. I know it was a quick one. Hopefully it was helpful, or at least, you know, interesting. I always like to watch update videos to kind of gauge and compare where my garden is, where it should be compared to, you know, like real farmers and all that nonsense. But it's just interesting to see things as they progress along here in the yard this winter season. Thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot to me. I appreciate you so incredibly much. I hope it is beautiful wherever you are. I hope it's sunny, and I hope you're having a really great day. Bye.